Taoiseach, there's 10 days left and just over 80% of households have not paid the household charge. I think it's fair to say that your government's handling of this issue has been shambolic. I think it's also fair to say that your desperation is evident from the increasingly shrill tone of ministers trying to frighten citizens into paying this charge. I put it to you that you should stop trying to bully the electorate and try listening to them for a change. And the reality is that on this issue, just as with the deaf schools, you have got it wrong. And you know, it's not simply a matter of the handling of the issue. What people do know is that the household charge is unfair and it's unjust, and that it should be withdrawn. The trade unions have been clear on this, SIP2 Unite, the CPSU, the Dublin Council of Trade Unions, all calling for this tax to be scrapped. So will you and the government now face facts? And tell me, do you really intend to bring hundreds of thousands of citizens before the courts on this issue, particularly when not a single banker has been jailed for causing the crisis that we're in? It's not a case of extending the deadline. It's not a controversy over whether or not the charge can be paid in a local post office. Will you accept, Taoiseach, that this unfair, unjust charge has failed and that it should be scrapped?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
No, the charge will not be scrapped. The charge will be replaced by a property tax, and the preparatory work for the introduction of a property tax is underway. And I look forward to hearing from you, Deputy, what are the Sinn Féin proposals in relation to a property tax. That would certainly be very helpful in the discussions that we're having. This government is not in the business of bullying anybody. But we do want to be straight with people, and I think that Deputy MacDonald, yourself, your party and others who are campaigning against this charge should also be straight with people. There is no point in misleading people into believing that the charge will not have to be paid, or that the charge will be wished away, or that it will be vanished in some kind of way. Households are required to pay the charge. There are penalties and interest charges, which are the normal type of penalties and interest charges that apply to unpaid taxes that will apply to this charge if it is not paid. And people who are advising, like your party, Deputy MacDonald, who are encouraging people not to pay it, are simply misleading people into a situation whereby they will be increasing household debt. That's not fair on the households concerned. By all means, it's fair enough for people to adopt a political position opposing the charge. That's fair enough, and oppose it here in the House and so on. But to go to the extent that you're going and that others are going to, which is encouraging people and advising people not to pay it, that's misleading people, and that's going to land people, households, in greater debt than they should be in.
Deputy MacDonald, please. Deputy MacDonald, please.
Taoiseach, far from misleading people on any of those matters, we've been very clear in saying that you do intend to levy this tax and that you will pursue people for fines and penalties. We also understand from you that you'll introduce amending legislation to coerce the public into payment of those penalties by attachment orders to their wages or their welfare payments. So the honest thing to say is this, Taoiseach. There are people out there who simply do not have the €100 to pay the charge. There are others out there who will not pay it because they view it, quite correctly, as a flat and unjust tax. It's also the honest thing to say, Taoiseach, that you stand over something that you know full well in your gut is unfair. It has been shambolically delivered. People have responded accordingly, and it strikes me that the sensible and the equitable thing to do at this juncture is to admit your mistake, as you have done before, and to withdraw this charge and the threats that you will pursue people, whether through the courts or whether via attachment orders. That would be the stuff of honesty, Taoiseach.
I was going to raise the household charge anyway, but in the context that only 15% only 15% of the people of this state have already paid the household charge. So does that mean that the 85% who have not paid are themselves subverting democracy? Because if you look at the amount of people who have not paid, it obviously means many Fine Gael people have not paid, many Labour people have not paid, many Fianna Fáil people have not paid, but they are people, they are citizens of this state, and they themselves are taking a stand. Many people who are not, have a leader. Many people who are not paying that charge are not paying it because it is unfair, because it is regressive, because somebody who earns €10,000 a week pays the same as somebody who earns €10,000 a year, and that is not fair. So if people are saying that anyone who does not pay the household charge is subverting this state and subverting democracy, that is shameful. What they should be doing is properly funding local government, so that they have the money. And what I would say to all those senators who are coming in here day in, day out, week in, week out, attacking Sinn Féin and attacking those who are taking a stand on this charge, you have your chance on the same day that the data expires to pay it on the 31st of March. Do not pay the 3.1 billion Anglo promissory note, because that is about 17 times more than what you will take in on the household charge. They are the choices available to this government. So don't come in here attacking Sinn Féin who are not in government. Do what you should be doing. Stand up for the Irish people. Don't pay the Anglo promissory note. Go after wealthy people in this country and not the small to medium-sized businesses and low to middle income families who are getting hammered by this government and got hammered by the previous government.
Well, obviously the Mahon report was published this morning, and it's quite a lengthy document, so we're still studying it. But our initial reaction to it is that after 14 and a half years, it just reinforces the public perception which was out there that big business and those in high political office conspired to corrupt the planning process. Now, while much of the focus obviously has been on the role of former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, and while the report did stop short of saying the word corruption, it has found that the evidence he gave was untruthful and has rejected it. As a result, there are a number of questions which remain unanswered in relation to his personal finances and donations. These are questions for Bertie Ahern to answer. In addition to that, there's also questions for Fianna Fáil to answer, because the report found that cabinet ministers at the time tried to undermine the independence of the tribunal, and in relation to that, not only did they try to undermine it, they also conspired to try and collapse the tribunal. Now, these are questions for me, Micheál Martin, as the current leader of Fianna Fáil, to answer. I understand that they are currently studying the report and are going to do a press conference tomorrow, but his reaction to this report will be a test of his leadership. Now, the report also made a number of recommendations which must be implemented, because the job of now restoring public confidence in the planning process, and not only the planning process but also the political process, must now begin in earnest. And as a result, these recommendations must be implemented by the current government.
What is it you'd like to see Micheál Martin do in response to this report?
Well, it's not for me to tell Micheál Martin what to do and what not to do. But if it was me and if it was our party, anyone who was found with questions to answer in relation to this report would be kicked out of the party. Now, you know, that's for Micheál Martin to do. He's leader of Fianna Fáil, and he has to ultimately take the action that he feels appropriate. But he should be very aware that the public are watching very closely to Fianna Fáil's reaction to this report. And in the interests of restoring confidence in the political process, he needs to do the right thing.
15 years and 300 million, do you think this spells the end of this kind of political culture?
That will only happen if those in high political office take on board the recommendations and implement them. Certainly the conditions still remain, and until we implement those recommendations within the report, and until, you know, people who take up political office do so for the right reasons, then obviously, you know, this always has the potential to repeat itself.
Well, the government keep telling the Irish people that unless we ratify the Austerity Treaty, that Ireland will not be in a position to access money from the European Stability Mechanism if Ireland needs to post-2014. This is simply not true. And furthermore, the Irish government has a veto on this issue through the ratification of the ESM. We in Sinn Féin have placed a motion before the Dáil which will be debated today and tomorrow, and what that motion calls on is the delay in the ratification of the ESM to allow the Irish people a free and fair opportunity to discuss the Austerity Treaty and its own merits. And furthermore, if the Irish people reject the Austerity Treaty, which we in Sinn Féin hope to do, that the Irish government would then be compelled to go back to Europe to seek the removal of the blackmail clause and to use their veto in this case if they need to do so. Well, what has happened at the minute is the only argument that the government can put forward in relation to support for this treaty is the fact that we would not be able to access funding from the ESM. It is the government themselves who have a veto on that issue through the ESM bill and the European Communities Amendment Act, which they want to ratify through the Oireachtas before the Irish people have a chance to vote on the Austerity Treaty. What we're saying is don't do that. Don't insert this blackmail clause. Use the veto if necessary and allow the people to have a fair and free debate. And if the government believes that the Austerity Treaty is in the interests of the Irish people, then let's have a debate on that issue, not on the fact that Ireland is being blackmailed into accepting this, otherwise the sky will fall in. And we have to be very conscious as well that the ESM is not the only funding option for Ireland. It isn't the only funding option at this point in time, and it will not be the only funding option in the future for this country. And indeed a number of economists as late as this week have produced a paper to show that the IMF have a number of programmes that Ireland would be able to participate in and post this bailout if this country needed a future injection of money. It's the option that Sinn Féin doesn't support. We want to see a change in direction so that we won't require a bailout, but that option still exists for the state.
But you said that the IMF and the rest of the Troika should go home and take their money with them. How are you proposing to fund services, health services, education services, welfare services, without the money from them?
Well, the argument that Sinn Féin put forward was well over 1 year ago, when at that point in time we had billions of euro in our National Pension Reserve Fund before this government injected 20 billion of that funding into the banks. And what Sinn Féin argued at that time, using the reserves that we had, including the 20 billion plus that was in the National Pension Reserve Fund, was to send the IMF and the European Commission home, was to ensure that burden sharing was placed on the bondholders in the bank, was to make sure that the Anglo-Irish promissory note was not paid out last March or indeed this March, and to restructure the Irish economy. Within the 12 months we believe that we would have back confidence to gain access into the international markets. But given that this government hasn't chosen that direction, given the fact that they have paid out the first instalment of the promissory note, have injected 20 plus billion into the banks during their term in office, that option no longer exists. So the reality is this state is reliant on emergency funding. We will have to deal with that. What we would like to see is the deal completely and utterly changed, but we would also like to see a change in direction so that we're not walking into a second bailout, something that the Irish government tells us is a ludicrous notion, but yet uses this blackmail clause in the ESM Treaty as the big stick to try and beat the Irish people into accepting the Austerity Treaty.